Right. Let's make a YouTube video. 2019, almost done. Almost done. And that means 2020 means a lot of new opportunities for new games, new fighting games. We already know that a few of them are coming out. We've got Grand Blue Fantasy Versus, which is coming out next year, early next year, February. We've got the new version of why am I stuck? Under Night in Birth. I don't know if it's coming out next year. We don't know that for sure, but Riot Games also has their League of Legends fighting game. Oh yeah, we've also have the new Guilty Gear Strive, which is also striving to make some changes to make it more appealing to newer players. And this is the thing, is that there's always like this debate between like the hardcore players and the newer players when it comes to how a fighting game should be made. Like, a lot of hardcore players feel like, oh my god, you're just dumbing it down for the casuals, and nobody ends up sticking around. And they're not wrong with that. Like, it doesn't really, I don't feel like dumbing down the games actually brings anybody who actually sticks around. And I think that's the core issue with fighting games. But on the other hand, fighting games are kind of complex, right? They're not an easy game to get into. None of them are. Even if you do make them easier to get into, I think Street Fighter V was an interesting experiment in that regard. It's like making it simpler didn't actually make it easier to get into. I mean, you could get into it and you could play in theory, but I don't think that you could still break through to a certain point where you say like you're actually learning and growing. And that's the core. This is the core issue, is that either side has a good argument, and I feel like the golden middle is somewhere in the middle. I feel the issue is developers aren't focusing on the things that could generate good player retention. So in order to create good player retention, I think fighting games that are to come out in the near future need to focus on 3 core pillars that I feel are going to be essential to any fighting game. Because here's the issue, that not only is our genre very not only is our genre being perceived as something that's inaccessible or difficult to get into, it's also very lackluster. There's this fragmentation going on when it comes to features. It seems like for every fighting game that comes out, there are several good ideas that don't get incorporated in other fighting games. Like, I'll give you an example. Like, just now we saw a very interesting something that's quite interesting with Tekken, is that in ranked games you can continuously rematch with the same opponent as many times as you want. And if I remember correctly, Samurai Showdown also has this. You can continue rematching the same opponent. But this hasn't been incorporated into other fighting games. It seems like ranked matches follow a standard. Like, you fight 2 matches and then that's it. Like, that's Street Fighter V, for instance. So anyway, this is an example of a feature that won't get incorporated into other fighting games. It's just going to be something that stays there. So I feel like because of that, we don't really have a standard. Like, what kind of standard fighting games need to follow in order for new players to feel like, okay, I recognize this game type. I recognize what this is. Like, if you're playing a MOBA, you pretty much know what to expect from a MOBA. In a fighting game, you typically can know what to expect, but when it comes to its feature set and the way it operates, you really don't have a way to tell. Like, every fighting game just feels like a completely different beast, completely unrecognizable. And I think with some standardization through these pillars, we can actually achieve this. So, in my opinion, if a fighting game wants to succeed, here are the following pillars that we need to follow. First things first, and I think this is probably the most important pillar. You can call this the center middle pillar that keeps everything steady, right? Like, it's the pillar to end all pillars, right? Robust online experience. This, I feel, is beyond, like, no compromise. Like, this is something that developers have to heavily focus on. And when I'm talking about online experience, I'm talking about everything related to online. I feel like there should be a place where players can go and actually have fun. Street Fighter V says you do that in lobbies. But the thing is, you need to find players. And in order to have fun, you need to actually be able to reward players as well. Like, you can't just say, like, oh, you're ranking up, so that's your reward. That's not a reward. That's not a reward. That's That's an inevitable conclusion. Let me put it this way. If you win and you keep winning, it's inevitable that you will rank up. But that's all that it is. Rewards are things like costumes, colors, titles, things like that. Stuff that can get players going without worrying about winning or losing all the time. Because that's the feedback you get from these games, right? You either win or you lose, nothing else. We'll get to that in a moment about information. Just to carry on, the other core thing that needs to be achieved for a robust online experience is, one, to know where the fun is and be rewarded for it, and second of all, to be able to find matches very quickly. Like, I shouldn't be sitting in front of a screen and not being able to find matches. Tekken 7 does this very well. We've been able to find matches non-stop. But this is probably also because Tekken is one of the most popular fighting games out there. It's got a very robust community underneath it. There's just tons of players playing Tekken 7. That's why it's so easy for us to find matches, right? And good quality ones. And finally, at the very least, the majority of matches have to be smooth. I'm not talking about perfect, frame perfect, no issues, no lag whatsoever. That's impossible. In any game genre, that's impossible. So having like the majority of matches be smooth, that is quite key. So in order to achieve these three things, to make this pillar really solid, we need, first of all, good rollback netcode. I think this should not be compromised. This should not be in any way. There are just no excuses anymore. The community has spoken that good rollback netcode is vital to playing a good fighting game online. And right now, one of the pillars of rollback netcode, GGPO, is free. It's a free license. Any developer can make use of it. Of course, it's not as easy as taking it and slapping it into a game, obviously, but it's free for them to incorporate into their code. So that's something that they need to focus on. They need to focus on from the ground up, because a game has to be developed for rollback netcode. This whole delay-based netcode that is being used in various games doesn't work. It creates a very, very unstable experience that doesn't feel good, that just makes players not want to play. And if they find a bunch of laggy matches, it just makes them really bad. Rollback netcode makes laggy matches feel fun, at the very least. That's the core thing here. Cross-platform play. This is something that I don't hear the community talk about a lot, and I think it's actually super key, especially for games that have smaller communities, because this is the problem. Fighting games are a niche, and within this niche, there are mini niches. Mini, tiny little niches in between. There's this anime fighter, and this anime fighter, and this anime fighter, and this fighting game, and this random fighting game created by this random developer. But people want to play them. They're enjoying them. They're building communities, but they're building communities in all of these different platforms. Here's an example. I bought Blade Strangers. I thought it was perfect to play on Switch because I don't need to use any crazy motion, so I can play it in handheld mode. Guess what? There are no players on Switch in Blade Strangers. I don't know if there are players playing Blade Strangers any platform, but I digress. This game could have done with cross-platform play. Like, just let me be able to play with anybody. Fighting games are one of the genres that really punish you if you pick the wrong platform to play on. Cross-platform play ensures that the game's communities can find each other. Not have to just rely on getting the right platform and all of that stuff. I mean, if you really want to play a game, you'll probably make that sacrifice, I guess, but I think that's a tall order to expect. Ranked, I feel, is another problem. Like, I think Tekken does ranked very well. I think Tekken has a very good example of ranked. Tekken doesn't really punish you that hard for your ranking, because first of all, you're making money that you can use later to unlock stuff and all that. And demotions really don't affect you that hard, because your rank isn't based on where everybody else around you is. It's based on you. It's based on your skill and how you're doing. Like, if you lose a bunch, yeah, you're gonna get demoted. But if you're performing well and you start winning at some point, you start learning and you're winning, you get rewarded with quick jumps. A ranking system that punishes you with demotions and sending you down a rank and all that stuff. I feel like this is not something that's fun. And I know a ranked situation is supposed to encourage you to play and to play, but the thing is that this whole thing needs to be backed by another pillar that we're going to talk about in a little bit, because I can go into ranked and lose a bunch, get demoted, and the only thing I have to show for it is I don't know why I lost, or I don't know what I'm doing wrong. Then I have to, like, switch off the game and get off it for a while in order to cool off and all that. But that's not a good gaming experience. And this is what all my pillars are all about, is creating a better gaming experience. Because let's not forget, a game's community isn't just about all of its players who are hardcore. It's about the entirety of the community, from hardcore to more casual. All of these comprise the community. And that's key to keep them all involved and to keep them all happy and have them something that gets them playing. The final thing about the online robust online experience is we need to have like quick information on how many people are online and where to find them. Like, I think that's another thing that can be easily solved, actually. Like, how many people are online. I remember, like, this random other game, Titanfall 2. I remember going every time on Titanfall 2 and I could see how many players were online. Like, this could feel, for a developer, this could feel like a discouraging thing if their game doesn't have a lot of players. But I think, first of all, if you're using cross-platform play, you're not going to have that issue that much. Like, you're not going to have an issue of having too few players and then other players being like, well, there are not enough players, so I'm not playing anymore. No, I think this is something that keeps players going, because you don't feel like you're in the void, in the unknown. Like, even if you have to wait a bit for a match, you know that there are players out there and that you could get matched up with them. So I think these are all really core to making like this really, really good online experience. The second pillar that I think is really essential to making a good fighting game is to have an engaging and educational game experience. Another thing that cannot be compromised anymore, I feel. Like, one thing I found in parallels to my job as an educator and a gamer is that gaming and education go very much hand in hand. Like, games are learning platforms. If you pick up any game and you know that the game from start to finish is teaching you things, whether it be through in-your-face, on-the-nose tutorials, or by having like some subtle little new nuances that are introduced every now and then, you have to use a new mechanic to overcome them. Games are education platforms. And fighting games can do the same. They can be equally the same. Like tutorials. Like, so many people are talking about tutorials and like we need more tutorials. But here's the thing, is that a tutorial, there's a difference between a tutorial that just info dumps you, just throws things at you and says, here, look at all this information. Learn it, absorb it, take it in. Right? And a tutorial that kind of like takes you through the steps and teaches you, allows you to practice, and then allows you to execute this in a more live situation, and then guides you to the next thing. So many people praise, for instance, Guilty Gear Xrd's tutorial. And I'm not going to say no. I'm not going to say that Guilty Gear doesn't have a very good tutorial. It has a better tutorial than other fighting games out there, but that is not high praise. That is not high praise. And I know, like, this is going to be an unpopular opinion. By far, I know. But here's the thing. Xrd doesn't have that good of a tutorial. It has some interesting ideas. And it does introduce proper fighting game terminology. But I'm going to tell you something about terminology, guys. This is something that in education is called meta language or jargon. And if players, for players, it's not important to learn this particular jargon. It's more important for players to learn what is the use, what is the meaning behind the jargon, what is its importance, what's its significance, and then they can learn what the jargon is in order to use it in conversation, because that's where you use jargon, in conversation, or in online forums, on Reddit, on tutorials, and on YouTube. Until players know what this is and how it's used, it's unimportant to know what the name of it is. So info dumping a bunch of this is a backdash, this is a just frame, this is a just defense, this is this is that. that doesn't really teach anybody anything. It just gives them more things to memorize. Players don't want to memorize shit. They don't want a flashcard system. They want to play the game. So you need to show them and have them not just show them what the significance of it is. You have to also show the player how it's used, allow them to practice it in a controlled way, and then have them practice it in a more live situation. And in order to do that, I think one very key thing to do is to stop trying to separate the tutorial mode from the single player and just incorporate these two together. That's what all other games do. They incorporate their tutorial within their single player mode. That's how you learn how to headshot in Call of Duty. That's how you practice how to use your grenades in Call of Duty. You do it in the single player mode. Yeah, sure, you can have a practice mode, mini games, all that stuff on the side, but the main single player mode has to train the player to play the game, to be able to use all the mechanics. For example, let's say you start off a game as a character and you're starting the single player mode and you're going through your journey and your mentor is teaching you like, oh, Grasshopper, I will teach you the art of anti-airing. Sensei, what is anti-airing? Grasshopper, anti-airing is when someone jumps at you and you punch them out of the sky like a fly. I mean, that's literally what I feel like needs to be done. So like you practice that, you see what it's like to anti-air, and then it gives you a bunch of opportunities to keep doing it over and over again in a very controlled practice sort of way, until finally it tells you, now this opponent you're about to face is going to jump at you a lot. So every time you see him jump at you, be ready to anti-air. And you score the player on how many times they were able to do it in this live situation. Maybe program the AI so that if the player's just constantly waiting for them to jump, then you don't jump. You get them to fight a little bit. This is how you get players to learn concepts. You don't get them by info dumping them. You don't get them by saying, here's a rudimentary tutorial how to move forward and back and how to block and push buttons. Now go to YouTube or go to Reddit to find out more. That's not how you do it. That's how I learned. That's how a bunch of other people learn. Guys, nobody buys a game package just to be told to go somewhere out into the void of the internet to find out more information. Unless developers are willing to start incorporating the entire fighting game community within their game. That's not going to happen, though. The other thing that fighting games don't have to make an engaging educational experience is information. I would like to see, for example, when I lose, what are the things that are killing me? Am I taking too much combo damage? Am I allowing too many people to jump in on me? Am I getting counter hit a lot? That means I'm pressing too many buttons? Tell me what's going on. Fighting games need to start really introducing proper information. Nobody ends up like learning anything. People just sit there and are like, okay, I lost. Why did I lose? I keep practicing this combo over and over. Why did I lose? Well, that's the thing. Fighting games aren't just about the combos. You need to be able to block and this and that. The game doesn't say this. It doesn't tell you these things. You can't just expect players to be like, oh, well, duh, dummy, you should know this. See, that's the thing, is that not everybody is super prepared to be fully focused on this, to be able to absorb every little bit of information. It took me a while to learn a very, very important thing in fighting games, which is to block. It seems like the stupidest thing ever, yet fighting games never point out the most important thing and the best option you could always have in a situation where you're not sure what to do is to block. The game should give you advice. Try blocking more. You're pressing too many buttons. Try blocking more. Try jumping more. Try doing this. Try doing that. Try using this mechanic. Try using that attack. This kind of stuff is things that the game should be feeding you. And now the last pillar, and this third one is genuinely about the game itself. All right, and what I feel like fighting games need to start really focusing on, because, and this will hopefully also avoid this whole situation of having games being simplified for no reason, is to create gameplay and mechanics that are actually really versatile. Like, one thing I really appreciate about MOBAs, for instance, is that MOBAs have a ton of characters in them. Each character has a level of difficulty. Like, some characters are easy to play, and there are characters that are easy to play that can be played in different areas. Like, Like, there's an easy character that can be played at top. There's an easy character that can be played in mid. There's an easy character that can be played in bot or in support or this or that. This is something that fighting games should be doing. You should have characters, first of all, be classified by what kind of character they are. At the same time, also show if they are easy to play or not, and explain why they're easy to play. Because, see, this is the thing, is that fighting games don't need to be simplified at the core, at the gameplay. They just need to have simpler characters to use. That's what I feel is super important. That's what I feel is super important. Don't simplify the game. Simplify some of the characters. Make them easier to play, even if they're not that good, even if they're not that strong. Make them viable enough for a player to feel like they're learning and they're growing and that they're finding a play style. That's the core issue, I feel. I don't feel players always just get super attracted to one particular character. They're like, I'm going to learn how to play this character. No, the game should be able to tell you, like, here, these are some characters that play in these different playstyles. What would you like to do? Would you like to be more offensive or defensive? You want to do grappling? You want to do more fancy combos? You want to be trickier? Here are the characters that can do this, and they're easy to play. And maybe the game can also encourage you at some point after several hours of playing, try this intermediate character. This is how we can avoid having a game that is overly simplified. We can have more complex characters and simpler characters and something in the middle. Also, beyond that, make sure that the mechanics, like, I think this is mega important at this point. I think this is what Street Fighter botches almost time and time again, except for Street Fighter 3. And that is mechanics like that the main common mechanics that all characters have. Like, the V system in Street Fighter 5 is ridiculous. I think that it's an interesting idea, but I think that what it does is it basically doesn't give everybody a common tool that they can use. 4 kind of did this. I mean, focus attack was sort of common. Like, it was the same thing across all characters, but the thing is still that each character had a different focus attack, which led to a completely, led to some focus attacks being better than others and some not as usable as others and other junk like that. Some mechanics just have to be usable across all characters. I hated the fact, for instance, that I couldn't do FAD. There was no reason for me to do FADC with Chun-Li in Street Fighter 4. Like, why? Why can't I use this cool mechanic with my character? And here's another argument. Like, Street Fighter 3 had parry. For every character, parry was downright the same thing. Didn't change across any characters at all, as far as I know, at least. It equalized that aspect of the game. And it made even characters, like, if you were able to parry well, you could make a character viable. And that's what I think is essential to mechanics, to core mechanics of the game. They have to be able to make a character somewhat viable. And that's how I feel. These are the 3 pillars that I feel every fighting game should stand on if they're going to be releasing beyond 2020.